Hey everybody, Thomas Helton here, Mr. Tim Hagans. Before we start our conversation, I'm just going to do a little intro. Since Tim is fancy, I had to contact his management for an appropriate intro, so this is the appropriate intro. Tim Hagans performs and records with the Tim Hagans Quartet on Blue Note, Palmetto, and Waiting Moon Records. He also is a guest composer, conductor, and soloist with the NDR Big Band in Hamburg, Germany, as well as many other large ensembles. For 15 years, he was artistic director and composer in residence for the Norrbotten Big Band, a jazz orchestra based in Sweden that toured Europe and featured guest artists such as Joe Lovano, Randy Brecker, and Dave Liebman. Tim Hagans was nominated for Grammy Awards for Best Instrumental Composition for Box of Cannolis from the Avatar sessions on the Fuzzy Music label, and for Best Contemporary Jazz CD for Reanimation and Animation Imagination, both on Blue Note Records. He is the featured soloist on the soundtrack of the movie The Score, starring Robert De Niro and featuring a score by Howard Shore. Tim Hagans is the music director for the Michelle Brangwyn Dance Ensemble, a performing ensemble of contemporary dance and music that integrates the musicians into visual stage imagery. Tim Hagans has performed and recorded with Thad Jones, Ernie Wilkins, Bob Belden, and Dexter Gordon. It was Thad Jones who encouraged him to write music, and Hagans' first composition appeared on a Thad Jones Eclipse LP. Tim Hagans got his start as member of the Stan Kenton Orchestra. Ladies and gentlemen, Tim Hagans. The interview's over. That's everything.
Thomas Helton, you're amazing.
Well, I'm still breathing. That's all I can ask for.
You're ready for audiobooks as well.
Oh, am I ready?
Not only are you an incredible bassist,
Lord,
composer, but you could also read some of my favorite books.
All right. So we're going to talk a little bit about this record that Tim recorded in. It was actually recorded in 1994, if I understand it correctly, but it wasn't.
Correct.
But it wasn't released till 1995 on the Blue Note label, and I believe it was your second recording on Blue Note.
That's correct.
The first being No Words. That had an all-star cast too. It was Bill Stewart and good Lord, that had everybody on it. Well, Lovano was on that one.
Yeah, Joe Lovano produced it and played on about half of the tracks. It was a group of musicians that I was playing a lot with at the time at different clubs in New York, especially Vigione's. And for my first record for Blue Note, which was actually the first recording that I did under my own name in about 10 years. I did an LP actually for a label in Cincinnati called MoPro Records in 1983. And then when I recorded for Blue Note 10 years later, it was my first chance to record a bunch of compositions that I'd been playing in the clubs with the musicians on the CD. So it was Bill Stewart, Scott Lee on bass, Mark Copeland on piano, John Abercrombie on guitar, and Joe Lovano produced it and played on about half of the tracks.
Certainly nothing to argue about. Nothing to complain about there.
No, not at all. And that was a CD was called No Words.
Right.
And it basically featured songs that I had written over the years at the piano, which sounds a little weird because I can't play the piano at all. But I like sitting when I'm resting my chops, practicing. I'd sit at the piano and I'd just try to find nice chords and melody notes. And a lot of the songs on No Words came from that activity.
Right.
And not really related to the way I improvise, the melodic language that I, rely on when I'm improvising, which is much more angular and intervallic than perhaps the melodic songs I would write just at the piano, searching for nice melodies and chords.
It's interesting. It's interesting how a different instrument would affect your writing. You know?
Yes, and I, like I said, I really can't play the piano at all. So even sitting at the piano, if I'm hearing what I would hear when improvising on the trumpet, there's no way I could play that on the piano.
Right, right.
And I'm, you know, many times wonder if I can even play it on the trumpet. But so the songs on No Words were you know, I don't know really. Well, I need 3 mouths because I have 4 thoughts going on at the same time. But I tried to write some beautiful melodies, and you know, I've always been influenced by Tom Harrell. He's one of my favorite trumpet players, and I wish I could play like he plays, but I hear some other weird kind of stuff. But for many years, I played a song that he wrote called Little Dancer, and I remember writing some melodies. Little Dancer was a beautiful waltz, and I remember writing some melodies, trying to imagine I was Tom Harrell writing a beautiful song, you know. And so that was kind of the point with some of the songs on No Words. And again, it came out of me just kind of like groping at the piano, trying to find beautiful sounds, rather than the angular trumpet vibe that is on the subject for tonight's discussion, Audible Architecture.
Right. Right. And so, okay, so it's a Blue Note recording. It's your second. It was recorded in 94, released in 95, and it was recorded at Power Station's studio in New York. That's a kind of a famous recording studio. I've heard about it quite a bit, but I've never actually been there myself. So I don't really know, other than it seems like lots of folks use that station. They use that place. So,
right. It's on West 53rd Street, and I probably recorded maybe a quarter or a third of all of the recordings I'm on, from the late 80s up into the present. I was there a few years ago recording at that studio, and they have several studios. One is a very large room where you can have a big band, a large ensemble, and then Studio C is where I recorded both No Words and Audible Architecture, and a big band record with the Norrbotten Big Band called the Avatar Sessions.
Right.
Because the Power Station was sold and renamed as Avatar Studios. I forget when. 2015, 20 years ago. I'm not sure the exact date. But the Power Station became Avatar Studios, and now I believe that the Berklee College of Music has taken over it as keeping it alive as a studio and also as a teaching studio. I could be totally wrong by saying that, but I think Berklee is somehow involved, because a lot of the major studios in New York that were really rocking in the 70s, 80s, 90s, the Hit Factory is another one.
Right.
You know, with the change in the music business and the recording business, a lot of the big studios couldn't stay in business.
Sure.
You know, everybody's recording their next record in their basement. So but that's kind of a brief history of the Power Station. But it's a great studio, and I recorded many times there.
Yeah. So Audible Architectures, just my own personal note on it is I was working on cruise ships when it came out, and my roommate and I were listening to a lot of Masada, you know, the quartet with John Zorn and Dave Douglas, Joey Barron, and Greg Cohen. And, you know, that stuff is, you know, really angular and except for the stuff that's, you know, a little bit more, you know, sort of Yiddish, Jewish sort of vibe. They do a kind of an Ornetti sort of thing. So that's when I started kind of expanding beyond the straight ahead thing. And he introduced me to to Audible Architectures, and it just kind of changed everything for me. And I had already been embracing the chordless thing. That was already something I was quite attracted to. So, but then to hear like that level of musicianship in that kind of a format really kind of changed, and then the compositions, of course. So, so you released No Words just shy of this one, correct? Like a year or so, just shy.
Right. This one, I recorded No Words in December of '93, and it came out in June of '94. And then Audible Architecture was recorded, I think, the 17th and 18th of December of '94, and came out the end of August in '95. So,
what was kind of going on in your career at that time? I mean, what were you? I mean, were you like just kind of a jobbing guy, or are you like a touring guy, a recording guy, or just like whatever, everything?
Everything. No, I've been very fortunate. I've played with, over the years, great musicians and great bands. At that time, I played a lot with Joe Lovano. When I first moved to New York in '87, I had known Joe for about 10 years. We played with Woody Herman together in the late '70s. And I started playing with Joe and met a lot of musicians through him. And also Bob Belden, who's featured on Audible Architecture. We can talk about Bob in a minute.
Sure.
One of my favorite subjects, talking about Bob Belden. But so I was working with Joe Lovano and Bob Belden, two great tenor players that play completely different than each other, but incredibly inspiring. And also in '95, I did my first concert with the Norrbotten Big Band.
Okay.
As a leader, and they were looking for a new artistic director. And so in November of '95, right after the Audible Architecture came out, I did my first concert with them, and we talked about a continuing arrangement with the band. And so I became the artistic director of the Norrbotten Big Band for about 15 years. And Norrbotten is the northernmost county in Sweden. It's up the Arctic Circle kind of divides it, and it's a very exciting place because it's very exotic and beautiful and cold in the winter. And
Luleå, sure.
Yeah, you've been there.
Oh, I have.
And the Norrbotten Big Band is an incredible big band, and open to all sorts of innovative ideas, and also they can play anything from the history incredibly well and swinging. So it was my great pleasure to be involved with that band for about 15 years. And I lived in the New York area, but I commuted about 8 or 9 times a year to do concerts and tours. And so that was starting to happen right around the time that Audible Architecture came out.
Oh, okay. So for the record, did you write the tunes that you wrote? Did you write them specifically for that record?
Yes, I did. It's an interesting question because I wanted to do something different than No Words. I think it's important to, especially when you're recording, it's like a document of what you've been thinking about at this particular time. And No Words, as I said, was kind of song-based, melodic things, although there were a couple of weird kind of free out things on there as well.
Yeah.
But I noticed listening to it back that most of the songs had nothing to do with the way I improvise on the trumpet, compositionally speaking. So I proposed the trio concept to Bruce Lundvall, the head guy, guru, genius at Blue Note, and he loved the idea. I remember talking to him one night at the Village Vanguard when I was playing with Joe Lovano, and he asked me what I wanted to do for the next record, and I told him I wanted to do a trumpet trio, and then add Bob Belden on a few cuts as well, just so there'd be a contrast. And also, Bob had told me around that time that he was going to stop playing the tenor saxophone. this is a long way around to talking about the compositions, but I'll get
What?
there. I promise.
Wow.
Well, yeah. I mean, Bob was an incredible saxophonist and also a visionary, a composer. I mean, he was, people throw the word genius around, and Bob was actually one of those genius guys. Very high IQ, graduated from high school early, went to college, went to North Texas early. I mean, everybody that was around Bob was just continually amazed at just the things he would say, how he would, relay thoughts and concepts. Just, unfortunately, last week was the 5th anniversary of his passing. So
Right.
but I still have his number in my phone, and there are questions I have about music or life or trends. He was always great at seeing, what was coming down the road and kind of visualizing how to make that work for himself and musicians. And so sometimes I think, man, I ought to call Bob about this. Then I remember, unfortunately,
Yeah.
But he at one point he was heavy into producing and composing, and he just said, I'm going to stop playing the tenor and just play the soprano, and I thought, well, then I'm going to, on this record, I already wanted Bob to play on a few tunes on the record. Then I asked him to play just tenor on the record, because if he really was serious, and you never knew when Bob said something like that if he was serious or not. But I took him for his word on that, and so he plays, I think, on 4 of the tunes, and wrote one of the tunes on Audible Architecture, and he plays tenor, and just is amazing. In preparation for our discussion tonight, last night I listened to Audible Architecture from the beginning to the end. I hadn't done that in many years. I'm not an egomaniac sitting around listening to my recordings.
Right.
But, once in a while, if I'm going to play one of the tunes on a gig and I haven't heard it in a while, I might go back and listen to, that kind of thing. But
Sure.
But I just sat in a chair and listened to it, and one of the things that really struck me was just the way Bob played on the record. It's just incredible.
Yeah, there's some really amazing moments and some really great interplay between you on a couple of those tracks. But yeah, his tune, was it what is it? Family Flowers? Is that his tune?
No, that's my tune. I have 3.
A Blues in My Neighborhood.
Right.
Right.
Blues in My Neighborhood. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And that was written. He wrote a suite, and I'm trying to think of the name of the suite. He's from Charleston. He's actually from Goose Creek, South Carolina, which is a town close to Charleston. And he wrote a suite of music. And I wish I could remember the name of the suite, but we played it with his ensemble. It was kind of a weird little big band. We played a concert in 91, 92, I think, in Charleston, and featured this suite that he had written for his hometown. And one of the songs was called Blues in My Neighborhood, and the word "my" in the title was capitalized.
Right.
So that it's like blues in my neighborhood.
Yeah.
Where he grew up. And I thought it was just such a great song and vibe. So I asked him if we could record it on this, because we played it together in his larger ensemble.
Okay. Wow.
And the original tunes that I wrote, I wanted it to come out of the language that I use, or just use is kind of a weird way to put it. But I play in a very quirky kind of intervallic way. And if you look, sometimes people send me transcriptions, and I can see that I'm actually I'm making the changes.
You're doing it.
And people that know me, I always talk about this note. I mean, on secondary dominance, and I know there's some people out there laughing now because they know what's coming. On secondary dominance, you have to play the third. If you don't play the third on a 5 of 2, you're playing a diatonic minor 6 chord, not the all important dominant leading to the. So even though I play rather intervallic and these kind of architectural lines, there's still the changes being made inside of all that. So I wanted to write tunes that reflected that, not just when I was improvising, but also in the tunes themselves.
Uh-huh.
So the first tune actually is I Hear Rhapsody. We can talk about that in a minute, why I chose that. But the second tune, for example, is called Jasmine and Three. My oldest daughter's name is Jasmine, and she was, very active as a kid. And so I wrote this song kind of as a portrayal of her as a 3-year-old, and it's in 3/4. But when I was writing it, I just wrote a bunch of melodies that I was playing. I would play and I would hit upon something that I liked, and then I would write it down really quick without any kind of tonality or time signature. And so some of these melodies seem to go together, and they seem to be in 3/4, not 4/4 or another time signature. So it became a jazz waltz, but it actually started out with just some, I'm using that song as an example, Jasmine and Three. It actually just started out as a bunch of free atonal intervallic trumpet lines, and sounded like if I did this and I did this and I changed this a little bit, then it would become like a 32-bar jazz waltz. And the trick was then, after I had the melody written, was to go back and find chords that would support the melody as
Who needs chords?
that would support the melody as a composition, but also would be logical and fun to improvise over.
Right.
And so once I found the melodies for several of these tunes, then I had to go back and figure out what kind of harmonic thing it was gonna have. So, and if you compare that to what I was talking about earlier, writing tunes, groping at the piano, trying to find Tom Harrell-like beauty, it was a different compositional process for Audible Architecture.
So with Jasmine and Three, you wrote most of those lines on piano or on trumpet?
No, on the trumpet. Everything was I just wrote on the trumpet.
Okay.
I didn't use the piano at all, except for trying to find some chords that fit with the melodies that I'd written.
Right. Huh. So yeah, I have to say it's funny that you chose "I Hear a Rhapsody," because I've not cared for the song like in the handful of years that I've been playing. It's actually one of my least favorite songs to play, or it has been. I've grown to sort of enjoy it, but I remember when I first heard the record, I almost turned it off. I was like, no, I don't want to hear this, because like why would you play this song? It's just so. "I Hear a Rhapsody." I'm going to assume, no, I'm not going to assume. You're going to tell me why you picked that one.
Well, I forget the first time I played it, or who showed me the tune, or, where I found it. But I always like playing over it because there are some very interesting chord changes that have to be made, And again, back to the secondary dominance and the thirds and certain notes that I like to use in certain places. But I just always liked it, and I can't think of a recording I heard, like other songs that I play. I've heard people play and say, like Freddie Hubbard recorded this one without a song on the Hub of Hubbard. Okay, I want to learn this song and play it, But I Hear a Rhapsody, I think maybe I just started playing with some people and always liked it.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to think why. I know there's a reason why it's the first tune on the record. One might think, since the record's called Audible Architecture, that we would start with that tune. But I think somehow I wanted a harmonic basis from a standard tune, functional harmony, to perhaps portray how I play the intervallic quirkiness over standard harmony as a reference for the more intervallic modal songs that perhaps are not really built on functional harmony. Maybe, and I'm not sure if that's true or not. I'm trying to think back. It was, putting this
Well,
together was unfortunately 25 years ago. But the thought may have been, I heard Woody Shaw play, I would say 1,000,000 times, but more realistically, at least 100 times from 1974, 75 until he unfortunately passed way too young. I heard him play a lot at a club called Boomers on Bleecker Street. And it was just basically some jam session gigs. I mean, they played Moon Train, they played some of Woody's other tunes, Little Red's Fantasy, perhaps. But they played a lot of standard tunes. And I really heard Woody's harmonic concept when he was playing on Stella, I Can't Get Started, Around Midnight, Joy Spring, in a band with Louis Hayes on drums, Ronnie Matthews, Stafford James, Junior Cook,
Wow.
And then when I heard him play on the more angular modal songs that he recorded during the Columbia years, it made sense in a way, because I heard him play over functional harmony, always playing the third on the secondary dominance. And actually, I mean, he was really inspired by Kenny Dorham, and he just came out of Kenny's incredibly beautiful harmonic way of playing and intervalized it. If he played the altered scale on a dominant chord going to a one chord, Kenny might play the altered scale or some variation, but very diatonic. And Woody played the same notes and the same intention of those notes, but played them with wider intervals. So I think hearing Woody play over functional harmony helped me understand what he was doing on the more modal things. And so perhaps that was the thought behind starting with I Hear a Rhapsody. Here's how I play over functional harmony, and then we're going to take it into this weird stuff over here.
Great idea. I hadn't thought of it that way. So we'll go back to that. I wanted to yeah, I'm going to go ahead and ask the next question on the thing, which is, so with the musicians that are on the record, I mean, now, at least as far as I'm concerned, everyone knows who Larry Grenadier is. But I mean, back in the 90s, I wasn't as familiar with him as I am now, and maybe other people are, as well as Billy Kilson. So were these your choices? Did you pick this band?
Yes, definitely. I've been playing with Billy Kilson with Belden, and it was just an incredible experience because there was so much energy, but also just like swinging like you couldn't believe. And we at this point we were living close to each other in New Jersey. We take New Jersey Transit after gigs or rehearsals or recordings with Belden, and so we talked a lot. And he told me that his early influences were like P-Funk and playing that kind of music. Then he went to Berkeley. He started studying with Alan Dawson, and got into the Tony thing because Tony Williams studied with Alan Dawson too, but Billy has totally his own, completely own thing. But that energy from coming from the funk world first, and then coming into the world of Alan Dawson and swinging, and I love bash and crash. So for me, Billy was the perfect drummer. And we have a chance to play once in a while together. It's always just an incredible experience. So I knew if we were going to do most of the record, 2/3 of the record as a trio, Billy was the perfect drummer because I like to leave a lot of space musically, but also it's good for the chops to take that cold, heartless piece of metal down and let the blood come in, even if it's just 5 or 10 seconds to refresh the muscles, and then hit the next idea. And with a lot of drummers, if I leave space, they get the feeling that they're playing too much and they start playing
they
less.
back off.
That they think I'm bugged or something. But you know, Billy and I, of course, talked about this, so he knew. But he knew without me saying anything. When I leave space, that's the time for him not only to continue what he's doing, but to make up for, in the sound energy picture, to make up for me laying out for 4 bars or 8 bars, you
Right.
know. And so with the trumpet trio record, you know, Billy was the perfect drummer, you know.
Yeah, I remember the first time we played together in Houston. I remember you telling the drummer, you know, what you wanted, and it was funny because he was such a fine drummer. But I'm just like, well, that's not really his style. But I'm just like, and then he would step outside of his comfort zone and give you beyond what he was comfortable doing, and it still wasn't enough. And I'm like, God, what does this guy want? And then, you know, and then I was like, oh, Billy Kilson. So so just that
Yeah,
that energy and that not, you know, not hesitation. I mean, Billy is like freaking amazing on the record, of course. I'm a fan. I have to say so.
yeah, no, he's amazing. And you know, a lot of drummers, especially young drummers, I find when I do master classes, I'm talking to young drummers in schools. They've been, and this is a good thing. They've been taught how to play with the proper dynamic for the situation,
Mm-hmm.
and but they've also been told a lot that whatever dynamic they started with is too much for the situation. So when I come in, I tell them that if I'm going to be there for 2 or 3 days with the, you know, conducting the big band and doing some small group things, that their main job is to make me say that they're playing too much for me.
Hmm.
And until I tell them they're playing too much, they have to keep trying to get up to that level.
Wow.
And then I tell them that I've never been able to tell a drummer that, and I'd love to. So that's your job. And you know, they're grinning from ear to ear because most of the time they hear the opposite, and
Right.
they know I'm making a joke and exaggerating. But for me, the drums, the energy from the drums, and it's not necessarily volume, although that plays a part of it. It's the energy, and you can play incredibly energetic at a soft volume. So it's not the volume thing; it's the action that's going on.
Right.
And they are called drummers, and there's a lot of drummers that are more like cymbalists, and I want to play with drummers. Forget the drums,
Right.
you know. So yeah, that, you know, so Billy's incredible, you know,
Sure.
just one of a kind. And Larry Grenadier and I played together in some situations as well. And I knew his brother Phil, who's a great trumpet player, Phil Grenadier,
Mm-hmm.
and he had done some stuff with Belden. And I knew Larry, and I thought, well, this will be a great band with Larry and Billy, you know. And I was right.
Yeah, I
you
know.
know, you know, during the recording, they made me play things that you know, I'm always trying to improvise, but sometimes I would have a picture of maybe what I wanted to happen. Um, Even before I started improvising, that the solo should start out this way, or maybe in the moment thinking it would be great if we went in this direction. And uh, you know, whether they did what I was thinking, which of course they wouldn't know because we're not that telepathic.
Right.
Whether it went in that direction or not, it always made me feel great, whatever they did. So I was very happy.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Larry is so solid. He's just so solid, you know.
Oh yeah, and everything's a melody,
Yeah,
um, and the time and the sound he has.
it's amazing.
I mean, we play a duet on the record. The other standard tune on the record is
You don't know what love is.
"You Don't Know What Love Is," and one of my favorite tunes that I play a lot. You know, I had the occasion to get to know Lee Konitz a little bit in the last 5 or 6 years. We kind of talked to each other in passing over the years, but um, I would go to his apartment and we'd play duets for an hour or so, and then have lunch and talk, and it was a great experience. And so I asked him one time why he, on every gig, and when I went to play with him and, you know, just duets in his apartment, he always wanted to play Body and Soul and Stella by Starlight. And, you know, and I love those two tunes. And he said, well, they just, you know, I've been playing them my whole life, and I come up with new things on them all the time. So why, you know, I'm paraphrasing what Lee said, of course, but I kind of feel the same way about I Hear a Rhapsody and You Don't Know What Love Is. I play those on at least a half or 2/3 of the gigs that I play that are under my leadership, where I can choose what we're going to play. That's, you know, that's what I play, because I always find new things to play over them. And I wanted to do a duet with each of the other guys. So with Larry Grenadier, we did You Don't Know What Love Is, just harmon, mute, trumpet, and bass.
Yeah.
And you listen to what he plays through those changes and during his solo, and it's just, you know, it's just amazing.
Yeah. No, he's a special player. Even that far back, he was a special player.
Yeah.
He still is. His new solo record is amazing. I saw him perform solo at the Bass Convention last year. Man, he's just getting better and better.
Yeah.
Incredible. Was that a working band, or was that just for that one thing?
Well, I tried to make it a working band. Before we recorded, we did some gigs at Smalls, and when the record came out, I did a week at the Iridium, but both Billy and Larry were out of town, and that was the only week that I could get into any club in New York around the time of the release. So I ended up, you know, playing with other guys, but yeah, it never really became like a touring working band, but we did do some gigs, you know.
Did y'all do some dates?
I'm trying to think. Yeah, you know, after the record came out, one night here, maybe a couple nights at Visiones.
Okay.
Yeah.
For the release, who did you use? This is just now I'm just asking because I want to know.
Well, Ralph Penland was the drummer, and Ralph is, you know, he played with Freddie Hubbard. The first time I heard Freddie Hubbard in April of 1974, it was Ralph Penland on drums. And it was just, I never heard a drummer like this. It was, and Freddie loved him. It was just an incredible energy, you know. And Ralph also played with Pharoah Sanders, and lived in California, passed away a few years ago. But when Billy couldn't do it, I was talking to Bob Belden, who was always kind of my advisor and somebody I'd bounce ideas off of. And he did the gigs at the Iridium as well, because he was on the record. And he said that Ralph Penland was going to be in New York. He had a week with Pharoah Sanders somewhere, and then could stay. So Ralph ended up staying and doing that week at the Iridium. And Ira Coleman played bass. And I'd played with Ira a lot, with Bob, before and after that. So that worked out. You know?
Wow. An interesting group. I would love to hear their take on the thing.
Yeah, I wish I would have recorded, you know, at the Iridium, but it didn't work out.
Yeah, you know, best laid plans.
Yeah.
So with the record, just were y'all when y'all recorded? Where I don't know the power station, of course. Were y'all in the same room, or were y'all separated?
Trying to remember. Actually, I think we were in the same room, and back then, this was before Pro Tools, and maybe not before Pro Tools, but Blue Note at that time we were doing direct 2-track direct recordings, and it was on 1/4-inch tape.
Nice.
So there was no mixing.
Right. Well, the mixing was live.
Yeah, and so Jim Anderson was the recording engineer, one of the great recording engineers of jazz. He's affiliated with the Clive Davis department at NYU, and just an incredible engineer. And he was like part of the band. because at that time the engineers, they had to mix as the musicians were recording. There was another great engineer, David Baker, James Farber, who I've worked with a lot. All of these guys were like part of the band, and they would come to rehearsals because they had to know on these specific tunes where the crescendos were going to be, where the action was, and they'd make notes. And then as we were recording, they were adjusting things, mixing as we were recording. And you know, we were in the same room, so there was going to be leakage, but it really didn't matter because we weren't mixing. So if the drums went into the trumpet mic or the bass mic, it wasn't like now where you want it clean and separated so you can go in and mix certain things without the leakage of other instruments. And it also meant that you couldn't do overdubs. There was nothing to overdub.
Right.
So if somebody messed up the melody or the time got a little funny or something on any recording, you just went back and did inserts.
Right.
And that also was the talent that the recording engineers had, because they were the ones that had to go in and like the old days with the 2-inch tape, take a razor blade and cut the tape at the right spot, at exactly the right spot, and then tape it back together.
That's a lost art.
So and I hear some things on Audible Architecture where I crack a few notes, and I played a little sloppy where I might go in today and say, that note in the melody is really important. I'd like to fix that one particular note, just so the melody is stated clearly what it is. And,
right.
See,
that kind of stuff, I think, and this is strictly for me, I think that's the stuff that I'm most attracted to, is the imperfections of, of course, when it's original tunes, how am I to know, the note's wrong or whatever? I mean, a cracked note maybe, but a wrong note, how could I possibly know unless I know the tune? But when I listen to that kind of stuff, I think that's why I like live recording so much. It's it's so terribly real, and right. There's no way to correct anything. It is what it is. And it kind of brings me closer to the musicians, and it brings me a lot closer to the music when I know that what they did is what they did. Nothing was gone back and polished over or tweaked out or anything. I think that might've been one of the reasons the record appealed to me so much, is because it just sounds like y'all are just going for it. And there's no like, oh no, we're going to redo this thing, or we're going to fix this note, whatnot. So now that I know that you didn't, it just reaffirms my feeling that live in the same room, especially, is just so terribly special. And it makes it's such a struggle now when I have to do a studio session. I'm in a little booth, and and we're mulling over note after note after note, and just like, but where's the soul? I mean, it's just like we've edited it out.
Right.
So that's beautiful.
Yeah. No, and one thing that I've never done as a leader anyway is make a live record, and I've always kind of wanted to do that, just for that experience of going in and knowing, perhaps throughout the day, whatever you play on this gig is going to be it,
Right.
And now I can, if I'm recording in the evening, like I would be at a club, but I'm going to a studio during the day, I can think about other things because there's an engineer that'll fix all my mistakes. Make my solo sound like Freddie Hubbard, So. I'm just kidding. But yeah, it would be nice to do a live record, and doing those records. I mean, I did a lot of records as a sideman also for Blue Note and Steeplechase, Crisscross. And you go into the studio and it's like being on a gig, because you can't overdub, you can't repair anything.
Yeah.
It's just, but you listen to the great recordings, the Miles bands of the 50s, Coltrane Quartet, who they go in the studio in the afternoon and then go to Birdland that night.
Yeah.
And they played at Birdland the night before. So it's just like the recording at Rudy Van Gelder's in the afternoon is just like the fifth set of last night's gig or the first set of today's gig.
Right.
It's all the same.
Yeah.
And I think that's why the music is so alive and vibrant, is they're just going in whatever the situation is and playing what they play. You know?
Right. Yeah. I'm a big firm believer in that, that process.
Yeah.
So I'm going to ask the question. I already kind of know the answer, but I'm going to ask it anyway, just because it's by far my favorite track on the record. Well, it has been, I guess, for a long time. It's Garage Band, of course. Garage bands, and I'm gonna kind of let you talk about this tune. But my one question, I guess, is: did you teach Billy Kilson that beat?
No, he taught that beat to the world. That's all his.
Yes, he did.
That's all his own thing. And I remember when we played the gigs at Smalls, and he was playing that kind of thing, and I was like thinking, oh, this is something else, you know. And there's actually a video, maybe you've seen it,
In Japan.
Yeah, in Japan, or Taiwan, Japan.
Of course, I was.
And somebody, it's a masterclass. Somebody's asking him about the garage band's groove, and he starts playing it, you know. And I forget what I said about this groove, but you know, I grew up listening to rock and roll and Motown and you know, R&B of the 60s, and also the you know, the boogaloo beats of Lee Morgan and Watermelon Man and Sidewinder. And so every record I've done, practically, there's something that's kind of a tribute to that thing. And so garage bands, and I must take credit for something. This title came in 1994, way before there was an app called GarageBand. And it's kind of like a tribute back to how many of us started playing in our parents' and neighbors' garages.
Sure.
Just jamming and trying to find things, you know.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to think what, because of course Billy changed the whole thing in my mind for the better with that groove he was playing, and I'm not sure what I thought of in the beginning, whether it was a straight, just kind of like funk thing, or kind of half swing, half rock. I'm not sure. I can't remember, and I didn't write anything down as far as notes, or, you know. But he just started playing this triplety thing inside of the, you know, the quarter note, and it was like, wow, okay. And that kind of dictated the way Bob and I played the melody when we do come in, you know, because we instead of playing like the 8 notes kind of straight, there's certain figures, there's kind of a little swing thing going on in there, because Billy was like you know, straddling both worlds of straight and swing and triplet, and
right.
But it totally captured the whole vibe of what might happen in a garage with people experimenting, you know.
Yeah, I think one of the things I've struggled with the times that we've played it together is I need to hear that beat, and nobody plays it that way. So, and not to anybody's, you know, I'm not trying to be dark on anybody. Just like I'm always expecting it, and I think the reason I'm hoping that it's going to make me play like Larry. So at least that's what I'm hoping. But it hasn't happened. It hasn't worked out quite so just yet. So
that's okay. I like playing with Thomas Helton just as he is. So, you know.
Are you going to start singing Billy Joel to me now? Just the way you are.
I'm not going to go that far. But.
Well, I appreciate it. I appreciate it. Yeah, no, that is definitely one of my favorite tunes. I liked all the key changes and stuff. It's just, I mean, I don't like that you put the bass solo in D flat, but you know, if I want to play the thing, I better start practicing, you know.
Right. Well, you know, it's kind of a weird take on the blues. Instead of the second section, or the, you know, blues, if you think of it as 3 sections, each being 4 bars, instead of going up to the 4 chord, it goes up to the sharp 4 chord.
Right.
Which then enables the second chorus to start, and if that becomes then the 4 chord in the new key, then it enables the next chorus to be up a half step. So each chorus, because of the perverted four chord, each chorus through the tune is up a half step, you know, and that's
Yeah.
how you landed in B flat. My apologies.
Lucky me. No, that just shows my weakness there, you know, and not that I have one, I have several. So just trying to keep it funky in D flat can be a little challenging, unless you're Larry Grenadier, of course. But no, it's a really great tune. Is there any kind of I mean, it so highlights your I mean, to me that is like Tim Hagans' writing style and your playing style. Is that it's so indicative of it, you know. So so when anyone ever asks, I'm like, well, you can check out, you know, anything he's ever done, of course. But if you really want to kind of like get, you know, like the beginning, you know, of to really kind of capture like his thing, you know, you get sort of the way he writes, you get sort of the way he solos, it gets, you know, the way he plays. It's like it's got all the things to it, you know. But is it based on anything in particular, or is it just
No, that's another one that comes out of the way I play, which, by the way, I call Daytonality, because I'm from Dayton, Ohio. So if everything you do comes from your beginnings, then the tonality that I use, the intervallic, quirky stuff, is tonality from Dayton. So it's called Daytonality. So for lack of a better song, when I better term, when I sat down to write these tunes, like I said, I just played kind of free melodies, and then tried to find some that went together, made sense. And so the melodies on garage bands definitely come out of like just kind of free Daytonality. And once I established the chord progression, then bending certain notes around so they actually fit into the harmonic thing, you know.
Now you're from Dayton, is that correct?
That's correct.
I mean, you school, everything?
Yeah, grade school, high school. My grandfather was the dentist to one of the Wright brothers. That's my claim to fame.
That's awesome. Well, I know you recorded your first record in Cincinnati, and we listened to that last night when I was playing sides. We actually listened to the whole thing last night, which is
I missed that. What was I doing last night? I missed
it. Preparing for this, I would assume.
Oh yeah, I was.
We were both listening to you.
Yeah. Wow.
So yeah, we listened to that last night, and I was really. I had no idea that Lynn Seaton had moved there, you know, and of course we all know Lynn Seaton because he, you know, of course I thought he was from Oklahoma, but he's at University of North Texas now, and you know he's super well known in the area here. But I had no idea that at some point he moved to Cincinnati.
Well, yeah, and I was living in Sweden. Briefly, I played with Stan Kenton for almost 3 years, starting in '74, and then I had a short little visit with Woody Herman's band, and Woody really didn't like the way I played, and also didn't like the fact that I played with Stan Kenton. So he fired me and said, go to Sweden. So I went to Sweden and I lived there for 5 years, and that's where I played with Thad Jones and Dexter and you know, a lot of American expatriates who were living in Scandinavia at the time.
Yeah.
But when I came back, I came back to Ohio and ended up staying about 2.5 years. But I came back one of the reasons I came back, because several things that I was involved in Sweden and Denmark were kind of ending for some reason. Bands that were dissipating, and just interest that was going elsewhere. And I came back to see my parents, and I knew John Von Olen, the great drummer. I'd known him for several years, and he said, man, if you ever come back to Cincinnati, come down and play with the Blues Big Band on Wednesday nights. And so August of, I guess it was '81, I came back to see my parents and hang out and also visit some friends in New York. And I went down to play with the big band, and it was John and Lynn Seaton on bass and Steve Schmidt on piano. Incredible pianist.
Yeah.
And then I went down a few nights later because they played on the weekends as a trio with different guest soloists, and it was a small club, the Blue Wisp, a very dark sound but intimate sound, and it reminded me of the way the rhythm section on really one of the first jazz records I borrowed from the Dayton Library sounded. Miles, Friday and Saturday nights, Black Hawk.
Mm-hmm.
And when I heard Lynn and Steve and John in this room playing some of the same tunes, If I Were a Bell and you know, Blues in F,
I love that tune.
Rhythm Changes, I said, man, not only does this room sound like the Black Hawk recording, but these cats, I haven't heard this kind of like swing live ever probably before, you know, and I'd heard a lot of music and a lot of great bands, but this just felt incredible. And of course the Black Hawk rhythm sections, Wynton Kelly, Jimmy Cobb, and Paul Chambers.
Sure.
And these cats, I mean, they weren't sounding exactly like that, but it was the same vibe of just this incredible swing. So that was one of the reasons I moved back from Europe, was to play with those cats.
Wow.
Because it made me play like I hadn't been playing, and I'd been kind of looking for a rhythm section that made me feel that way. You know?
Yeah.
So there was a couple who were there every Wednesday night listening to the big band, Helen and Fred Moore, and they started recording the big band. You know, they started a record company and they funded everything. And so the Blue Wisp Big Band probably did 5 or 6 records for MoPro, the label was called. And they asked me to do a small group record. So it was those guys, John Von Olen, Lynn Seaton, and Steve Schmidt, myself. Yeah. And there was another drummer I was playing with a lot, Mark Wolfley, and also Sandy Suskin, a great alto saxophone player, flautist. And so that was the band on From the Neck Down.
Yeah.
And so that was my first record, and it's on an LP.
Yes, it is.
I run into it once in a while, and it's one of those little projects I've got on the list to release as a CD. So we're kind of working on where the original masters are, and
oh yeah. What we were speaking yesterday, and I asked you if there was any outtakes of Audible Architectures, and so one day we're going to have that conversation.
Yeah, I think somewhere on a DAT tape, maybe even a cassette tape, because I know we did a few takes, and actually I was not happy with the way I played. I remember not happy with these earbuds either. I was we did 2 days of recording for Audible Architecture, and we did 2 takes of I Hear Rhapsody, and I wasn't happy with either one of them. And we came in the next day, which was a Sunday, and Bob was there for that day, Bob Belden, because we saved his stuff for the second day, and he came in while we were re-recording I Hear a Rhapsody, the 3rd and 4th takes. And I remember I walked into the studio and he says, "What are you doing?" You know, he says, "The first take yesterday was the best. You know, you don't have to like keep doing this, you know." so that's actually the take. The very first take is the take that's on the recording. So I know there are alternate takes on some of the tunes.
Well, if you ever
format and where they are, what box they're in, I'm not sure, but
if you ever dig those up. So back to one of the tracks on Audible Architectures on Drum Row.
Yes.
Did you intentionally want to start with Harmon and brushes and switch to sticks and open?
Right.
That was on purpose.
That's on purpose.
Okay.
And as I mentioned before, I wanted to do a duet with Larry and Billy. And so You Don't Know What Love is a duet with Larry Grenadier. And so I wrote this piece called Drum Row for Billy Kilson and I to play together. And it's a 12-tone row, because I wanted it to be totally atonal. And so hence the title. It's a 12-tone row written for the drum. So it's called drum row. And I also wanted to get away from 8-bar phrases.
Mm.
So it's a 10-bar trading format.
Okay.
And the head is played. There's two versions of the melody. One is the first time through is the row with a set of rhythms in a certain order, and then the next melody that's heard is the same row in retrograde, backwards, with different rhythms. And those are 10-bar phrases. But the idea was to have the whole tune about trading. So I play the first 10-bar atonal melody, and in a harmon mute, Billy plays brushes, and then he plays 10 bars of like solo. And then I come in with the next melody, and he plays another 10 bars, and then I start improvising, and that's the format and I'm not really improvising using the row at all. I'm just kind of freely playing and kind of trying to take ideas. You can hear like the conversation, ideas that he's playing that I try to embellish on when I come in. But I left it up to him. It's like it's a drum feature. So whenever he wanted to change the sticks, then I would hear that in one of his 10-bar trading periods, and I would take the mute out. So it was his decision when we went to sticks and open horn.
Wow, you had to be on kind of watching because
Well,
he does it. Because he does it really. He's really slick when he does it.
I know. And even last night when I was listening to it, I was waiting, for him to go to sticks, and it's so subtle, you almost don't notice it.
Yeah.
And when I come in with the open horn, it's
it's a big deal.
Swing and bash and crash. So,
right. Yeah. As soon as he goes to that ride, it's like game on. Yeah. No, that was really neat. I kept telling myself, oh no, they've totally planned that thing. No, what if they just did it? That'd be so great. They're just that good and they're that in tune,
Well, I like writing tunes where the participants are in charge of the form and can, with cueing and different harmonic things, that if you want to play over this harmonic thing, then you can play over it as long as you want and then cue the next period. That way, every time we play the tune, it's different, and you're not just bound to a 32-bar, 24-bar form.
Sure.
You can be in charge of the form, and it's not just the leader that's in charge of the form. Everybody in the band can help shape the music using the different elements. So this was a way of letting Billy know that when he was tired of playing 10-bar phrases on brushes, he was free to go to sticks anytime. And I would follow by taking the mute out.
I wish everyone I played with would adhere to that. I decide what the form is, even if it changes from chorus to chorus, because it's probably going to.
Well, and I also think that it's important to vary the solo order and even songs where if there's two horn players, bass and piano or bass and guitar, that everybody plays over a different vibe. And I think it's not only interesting for the musicians, but also the audience. And, I'm a strong supporter of bassists' rights. And so I always try to plan a bass solo, if not an open bass solo in your case, because you're such an amazing solo bassist, at the beginning of a song, before even the head is played, at least right after the head, to have it go into a bass solo, because I know after playing rhythm changes for 20 minutes behind horn players who won't stop, and then they look at you and go, okay, you got it.
Oh, and then they stop. They just stop. That's always my favorite, is when they're cooking along at 300 and they've played all the things, and then everyone stops, and that drums, piano, everybody just kind of stops and looks at you. It's like, all right, here we go.
Well, that's when you get out three bows and start,
Well, see, I didn't do that for such a long time. I tried to be that guy that like, nah, man, I'm not gonna be that guy. But now I'm totally that guy. If you leave me to actually, even if you don't leave me alone, I'm probably gonna do that anyway. So
Right. Well,
the more comfortable I get with myself, the more I'm just gonna do what I want.
right.
On I know we kind of talked about it briefly. I've listened to You Don't Know What Love Is more times than I can remember, and I keep wondering, does it start out free and then go into time, or is it in time the whole time?
A good question. I think I play a little cadenza before Larry comes in, but I think, and I should know because I just listened to it, but I think it starts pretty much in time.
Oh, when he comes in?
Yeah, but a lot of times I play it where it doesn't go into time until the bridge, because the bridge is such a
change.
a dramatic event.
Yeah.
This dark minorish vibe, and then all of a sudden you get this. It's like a major 2/5 into A flat. It's like
Right.
the sun comes out.
Right.
So it just depends.
Okay. Yeah, I'll keep listening because the thing is, of course, it doesn't matter. And that's what I keep reminding myself. It doesn't matter because it's just, the interplay is so beautiful. It doesn't even matter if it's free or not free. That's more just my own personal curiosity. If like, just kind of following each other until you get to the bridge or something like that.
Right.
Yeah. But maybe I'll ask Larry.
Yeah.
Someday.
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember on shorts, the most distinct thing that I remember on that is Belden solo.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I don't even know what to ask about it. It was just so heavy, because like for me, Belden, like my first experience with Belden was more as a producer. Like I didn't even know he was a saxophone player, and he put out a record of Prince music.
Right.
And even then, I didn't buy it because of Bob Belden. He had put one of my favorite singers on that record, and I was on a mission to collect everything she'd ever sang, Holly Cole out of Canada.
Right.
So I bought the record, and the big purple record, and it's Bob Belden, and I was like, oh, who's Bob Belden? And then you start doing the research, and it's like, oh, he's this guy. Oh, and he's that guy, and he can play his ass off too. It's like, okay, so this guy just kind of does everything. So he was, I guess. There was no one thing that inspired me by him. It was that he tried to do everything, and I like that a lot. I like people that just like try everything all the time.
Yeah. No, he's incredible. And a funny thing, just there's a million stories about Bob. In fact, we could write a book called About Bob. I see that Ashley Kahn, the great writer. Hello, Ashley is joining us. He's written the books about the birth of the cool and Love Supreme, and also one of my favorite books about jazz of all time, The House That Train Built, about Impulse Records. Ashley, you're amazing. And,
You are.
I think Ashley should write a book called About Bob and collect stories from people.
Wow, that's going to be a couple of volumes.
Well, and here's a story. Okay, you mentioned the Prince record, and I'm sorry, I forget that it's a Prince song, Where Doves Fly, I think is the name of the record. And Blue Note. Bruce Lundvall was a big fan of singers. He loved singers. Holly Cole, Diane Reeves, Cassandra Wilson. And so he asked Bob, and Bob probably proposed this anyway, to do a record of Prince songs featuring the singers that were on the label at that time. And of course, all of Bob's cohorts provided the rhythm section. Scott Kinsey, Ira Coleman, maybe David Dyson, the great electric bassist who's on the Animation Records, was on this.
Mm-hmm.
Jimmy Tunnell on guitar. And I was on a few tracks, and it was doing versions of Prince tunes the way Bob could do them so brilliantly and turn them into like a jazz vibe but still be true to the music. But Bob was, and I'm giving away secrets here, but I think it's probably okay. Bob was great at getting things done very very quickly, and also asking for probably more studio time than was needed. And of course, this is back in the day. We're talking the mid '90s, maybe '96, '97, when there was, this is before Napster and before things changed completely, and people were still buying music and actually going to record stores, and so there were budgets, the record companies, and I'm sure Bob proposed a budget that had more time than was needed to do this record. And so I remember being at some of the sessions, and we did the singer tracks. They sounded great. The music wasn't technically that difficult for us. And then all of a sudden, Bob says, "Okay, we've got 3 hours tonight, and we've got all of tomorrow night. We're going to record a record for Blue Note called Prince Jazz." And it was totally different. It was that core group that became the animation band: Billy Kilson,
right,
Scott Kinsey, David Dyson, Jimmy Tunnell on guitar, and so we did a record that came out only in Japan called Prince Jazz. That was just Bob's whacked out arrangements on other Prince tunes. So we actually, when you mentioned the Prince record, I wasn't sure which one you were referring to until you mentioned Holly Cole.
Oh,
On the one that featured the singers. But Bob was great at using studio time and always figuring out how to have some left over to do a few tracks. In this case, it was a whole CD, but to do a few tracks of some wild stuff that could be used later for something else,
Wow. And I love it. I love him. I love him.
Yeah.
I miss him.
Yeah.
So he wrote Blues in My Neighborhood, and let's see, what's next? Is that just like a see you later type thing, or what is that? I mean, it's only like a minute and some change, right?
Right. Well, it's interesting, and how it leads to the next record I did for Blue Note. But in the early '90s, I played in a band that was led by Gary Peacock, great bass player, and it was Vic Juris on guitar, and John Riley on drums, and myself. It was a quartet. And then when John couldn't do it, Jeff Williams played drums. But that was kind of the core group with John Riley and Vic. And at the time, Gary was playing a lot with Keith Jarrett, and but he wasn't, he ended up buying a house, I think, up by Woodstock, but he was living in a garage apartment in Tarrytown, New York, about a half hour north of the city. And so I would ride up with Vic, because we were living in the same area, to Gary's place, and John would drive down from where he was living a little north of where Gary was. But Gary had already started the rehearsal before we got there. and we just walk in, and Gary's playing. He doesn't even say hello. We just get out our stuff. Vic plugs in his amp. John sits down, puts his cymbals on while Gary's playing, and maybe I've started because I don't have anything to set up. And so we play for an hour or so, and then finally we'd stop and have some coffee, and Gary would say hello to everybody. But that was kind of like how the band rehearsed,
Yeah.
And we did a few gigs at Vigioni's and some other places in Boston, and recorded a few days in the studio, and it unfortunately never came out. But Gary, we'd ask Gary, what are we going to rehearse, or what are we going to play? And he'd go, "Well, we'll play whatever's next." And then he'd just start playing, and I thought, wow, that's great. So I ended the record, this record, Audible Architecture, with like a minute and a half just solo trumpet, and I recorded 4 or 5 of those, and then decided on this one that's on the CD, of course, and used Gary's title, Whatever's Next, kind of like leading to it's an answer to the question, well, what happens after this record?
Right.
And when I recorded this in '94, I had no idea what the next record would be. And I wasn't even sure there would be a next record after recording a trumpet trio record. And what turned out to be next was animation imagination, that you mentioned in the beginning, and which is totally different. By that time, drum and bass had become all the rave and rage in the underground world in London. And Belden and I used to, like, this is early, very early dial-up internet stuff in 97, 98.
You've got mail.
Exactly. From the clubs and the underground clubs in London, they would like live stream in some very primitive, cryptic way. And so we were on the telephone with each other, watching, trying to get into these clubs with this very, jerky live stream to hear like the real organic drum and bass stuff that was going on.
Yeah.
And listening to records by Cujo and Ronnie Size, and there was a great record that Bill Laswell put out called Oscillations.
Okay.
That I used to use as a play along, just because it was, an hour of driving drums.
Right.
So Bob and I started talking about doing a drum and bass record where we would commission some DJs to do some pre-recorded things. This is before any kind of live sampling, and Scott Kinsey was involved and actually did the track for the title tune, Animation Imagination. And some other DJs, DJ Smash, DJ King Size, they all came with ideas, and I either wrote some melodies over these things or we played free. We had a lockout for 5 days, again, a power station, where we could go in any time of the day or night and just record and fool around. So it was a completely different type of record. But Bob and I decided that we were now dealing with drum and bass, but, wait a minute, Audible Architecture was drum and bass. So I played the animation CD starts with me, Ira Coleman, and Billy Kilson playing something that really belongs on Audible Architecture, just something really up-tempo,
yeah,
kind of audibly swinging and violent for about 2.5 minutes. And then that track goes into the new world of Scott Kinsey's Animation Imagination. But the first track on that CD is called The Original Drum and Bass, as kind of a bridge between Audible Architecture and this new thing.
Nice.
It's kind of like how Rocky 2 starts. that Sylvester Stallone is still screaming Adrian in the ambulance to the hospital, which is just a continuation of how Rocky 1 ends. So
right.
That's kind of like the concept with whatever's next, solo trumpet going to asking the question, and it gets answered with the original drum and bass on animation.
Wow. Yeah, I remember when that came out because my best friend Robert Boston, he bought it like right away because he knew about you because of me, of course, and we were getting into the free thing in the mid '90s. We were just we would play our gigs, and then we would go to his house, and then we would just kind of experiment with a bunch of other things. And he bought that record, and I was just like, I don't know, man, this is the record that you need to be listening to. I don't know why you're listening to this. I mean, I'm sure it's fine, but it but he eventually did convert me over. But yeah,
good. I'm glad.
Well, yeah, it's still you. So I mean, of course I'm convinced. But no, Robert was always kind of like dragging me forward. When I just wanted to keep going, I wanted to stay where I was at because I was so happy. But some people are visionaries, and some people are just along for the ride. So,
well, you're definitely not along for the ride. Let me tell you.
Beautiful, man.
One of those cats.
I am a cat, and I have a cat. This is a cat. What is there anything else you wanted to say about the record at all, or any fond memories? Or I want to say one thing, just my own personal thing to Ashley Kahn, because I can't believe he's like checking us out because Ashley's amazing. And I was working in Nantucket a couple of times, and the Blue Note book came out, and it just changed my life. And I was like everyone, I was already obsessed with it, So So the book just changed everything, and it wasn't even just like the subject. It was the way it was written really did it for me. And I distinctly remember when the Coltrane book came out. I think I bought 2 copies, and I gave one to Michelle. Like,
right. Yeah,
like
we've got it over here. Yeah.
yeah, because it's like, anything he writes, I'm reading it too. So it's like
yeah.
I'm constantly. I think actually I might start rereading those now.
Yeah.
Because they're that good.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you want to kind of like, if you any kind of I don't know, nostalgia for the session or the record or anything, before we kind of wrap it up.
Well, one little interesting, side fact is, family flowers. I have 3 daughters,
Right.
Jasmine, Iris, and Lily Rose. So they're all, flowers, But those flowers gave me the chicken pox about a month before this session, because and I'm obviously, by the way I think and play, I'm an only child. I spent a lot of time with my own thoughts, and so I didn't have the chicken pox when I was a kid. Although my mother told me that I had them and it was okay to be around my kids, but I soon found out that she was misremembering and just remembered the measles that I had. So about a month before we were going to go into the studio, I had the adult chicken pox, which is very dangerous, and it's impossible to practice when your lips are swollen the size of baseball mitts, and
Right.
and the energy, everything. So and I tried to postpone the date. But both Billy and Larry were in January. This was recorded in December. In January, February, they were, busy, and we couldn't do it. So I just pulled everything together, and I started practicing probably when I shouldn't. And there are press photos of me that Jimmy Katz. We haven't talked about Jimmy Katz, but he's one of the great all-time photographers, jazz. And you look at a lot of downbeat covers, Blue Note records for other labels, and Jimmy Katz is like an incredible photographer. And he gets more than the picture; he gets the person, And he took the pictures for the packaging on Audible Architecture, and also the studio sessions. And I have some of the press photos, and also some of the ones that weren't used as the official press photos, which is Jimmy gave me the copies of the pictures, and you can see the remnants of chickenpox all over my face. But it's an interesting thing about events in life and what happens when. I just shifted my right leg, and because I did that, now my life will be completely, in minuscule ways, different than if I hadn't shifted my right leg right then, And so thinking about those kind of thoughts, I'm using this arm now. And so now everything after that is different because I did this instead of leaving and demonstrated this whole concept through legs and arms. But if I had postponed the date, Audible Architecture, or even hadn't gotten the chicken pox, the music would have been totally different. That's what happened those 2 days with those people. And even though I was feeling a little weak still, I'm glad that I didn't change I'm not glad I got the chicken pox, but I'm glad it didn't cause me to change the date.
Yeah. Wow.
Although some of the weird dreams and the hallucinating with adult chickenpox maybe caused me to play some different notes than I would have if I hadn't gotten the chickenpox. But I remember thinking about it before we went into the session. How's this going to work out?
Yeah, right. Well, I have heard the record described as sick, so.
Well, there you go. There you go.
Well, Tim, it's been really enjoyable. I certainly miss hanging out with you guys and playing with you guys.
Yeah.
But
we'll do it soon.
I hope so. I know we're still we're doing stuff, but at a distance. So
yeah.
And even that.
Well, I was going to say you're like the king of social distancing, but making everybody feel like they're in the same room. You know, I mean, you're doing incredible things with the sides parties and solo bass things. Asking me to do this, I'm incredibly honored. So not only are you, making your mark as a musician and impressing all of us, but by doing things like this, you're keeping people together. So,
Oh,
Thomas Helton, man.
before we split, there was a question early on, like an hour ago, from my friend Paul. He asked, so he says your work on the soundtrack to the score was wonderful. Were you in any of the scenes when they cut to Cassandra Wilson singing De Niro's Club, or was that just her band? Were you in the movie?
No, I was audibly in the movie.
Oh, okay.
But Howard Shore, who wrote the music, was a good friend of Bruce Lundvall's. And I was asked to do this because I had done things with Belden, and I think Howard had gotten those records through Bruce and had said they're doing this movie where Robert De Niro owns a jazz club and they want some performers. So everybody on the visually in the movie was a Blue Note artist, Mose Allison,
Oh, okay.
Cassandra Wilson. But and then he recommended me to Howard to play because Howard wanted like some harmon mute trumpet stuff. So Bruce was behind the whole thing.
Oh,
but I'm not that photogenic, so I wasn't asked.
What did somebody tell me once? I have a great face for radio. All right, Tim, I'm going to let you have the rest of your evening, man. I do appreciate your time, and I encourage everyone to buy everything on his discography. Also, I want to make it very clear that everyone that can hear my voice can take lessons from Mr. Tim Hagans, private lessons from Tim Hagans. I mean, already you should be like frothing at the mouth. So go to the website, and Tim is teaching online, and wherever you are in the world, he can make you a better musician. So.
Well, thank you, Thomas, and I promise to reveal the magic behind thirds on secondary dominant.
I'll never understand that. I'm just a bass player. 1 and 5 is all I need to worry about. All right, Tim, have a good night, my friend.
All right, thank you. You're amazing, Thomas, and everybody that tuned in, thank you so much. You're all amazing, too. Thank you.
All right, Tim.
See ya.